The detailed question tells you where to look. It tells you to look at the clay. And the main idea question doesn't tell you where to look. It asks you what's the most important one. Okay, so the main idea questions on the SAT, this is actually a lot easier if we have a question in front of me. So I'm just going to quickly go into Khan Academy information and ideas. Okay, this is not a hard passage, and I think everyone has probably seen this passage before. So everyone, go ahead and take a moment to just remember this passage, okay? You guys should probably be able to figure out the answer pretty quickly. Okay, now, fuck the answer. I don't even care about the answer. Okay. I want specifically for main idea questions, I want you guys to try something else now. Okay, in this passage, how many transitions do you see in this passage? Okay, so some of you have said one transition for a reason. Some of you have said one transition for a different reason. And some of you have said two transitions. Let's start with the first group. The first group is you guys said one transition, and here's the reason why you said one transition. You were looking specifically for transition words. So you looked at, for example, and you said, oh, that's a transition word. I learned that from a textbook. That is why you think this is the one transition, because you found the transition word, for example. You guys will tend to score in the 500 to 650 range. Now, the second group of you said one transition, but you weren't actually looking for transition words only, okay? You were actually just reading this sentence, okay? And then this sentence, and then you saw the for example, and then that gave you the idea that, hey, this stuff is an example of this stuff. You guys will score between 600 and 800. Now, there is a third group who will see two transitions. And you guys are the ones who are really good at the logical transition questions. And it's just that when I asked you this question, you actually saw this transition here, and then you also saw another transition here, okay, at to intensify. And the amazing thing is you saw that there are two examples. Example number one and example number two. So if I put a blank here, if I drew a blank over here, do you see my mouse right here? Okay. If I drew a blank here and I asked you to predict an answer for a transition question, for example, as a result, in addition, however, therefore, then you probably would have said additionally. You would have noticed that this is a second example. So let me just explain what are the two examples. The first example is this. She uses the roots from Arizona, but she also uses the clay from Arizona. The clay from Arizona, okay? So she uses the dock roots, but also the clay. And roots and clay are not the same thing. They are one example and a second example. If you are specifically identifying that, you are now between 650 and 800. 650 if you are a trained 650 scorer, and 800 if you're just natural. How do you get a main idea question right? A main idea question is just a harder version of a detailed question. A detailed question requires you to separate general idea, example number one, example number two, and just see the transitions there. And then the detailed question will say something like, based on the text, what is true about blah, 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 clay? And then you'll be like, clay! And then you'll say something about the clay, right? Detailed question asks you to go into a specific part of the passage, whereas main idea question asks you to prioritize parts 1, 2, and 3. Which part of this passage is the most important? And then you have to be like, this is the most important one, okay? So again, if there's two transitions, there's three parts. There's part 1 over here, part 2 over here, and part 3 over here, right? Main idea question tells you, detailed question tells you to look at one of the parts, but main idea question forces you, asks you which one is the most important one. You look at this one and you say, she uses local Arizonian plants and vegetables to dye wool. That is the main idea, right? After that prediction, you just make that match. She draws on local resource and approach to Daewoo, and it's definitely C. Okay, so this is a relatively easy question, but even though it's a relatively easy question, I bet out of 20 people who got this one correct, probably only 3 people had the right answer in their head before looking at ABCD. Like they predicted the answer before looking at ABCD, and even if I forced all 20 of them to make a prediction before looking at ABCD, I would say on average for my classes, probably around 13 or 14 students would actually realize that it's the first sentence that's the most important. Okay, and then these two are just supporting the first sentence.